Amara was born into a world that she did not choose, a world made of strict rules and whispered teachings and walls that stretched higher than any dream she could imagine. She lived inside the Path of Light, a remote desert commune hidden from the outside world, where a single leader, known as the Guide, controlled every breath, every thought, and every belief. Amara had been brought there as a child by her parents, who believed that the outside world was full of corruption and darkness, and only the Path of Light could save them. Her earliest memories were of morning sermons in a dusty courtyard, where the guide stood with his silver hair glowing under the sun as he spoke of purity, obedience, and sacrifice. Children stood in lines, hands at their sides, eyes lowered, because eye contact was considered pride, and pride was sin. Amara learned to speak softly, to move quietly, and to think only thoughts approved by the guide. The commune had no mirrors because vanity was forbidden, and they had no clocks because time belonged to the guide alone. Every day was a cycle of prayer, labor, and study. Every night was a reminder that leaving the path meant eternal ruin. Fear was the fence that kept everyone inside, even though there were real fences as well, tall and metal and watched by sentries who never smiled. Amara grew older without understanding that her life was different from others. She never saw television or phones or cars. She never knew that girls her age laughed loudly or wore colorful clothes or dreamed of futures of their own design. Inside the commune, identities were washed clean and replaced with new names and new roles given by the guide. Amara was given the role of caregiver for younger children because the guide believed she had a soft heart, but a soft heart was also a dangerous heart, so she was watched closely. Her parents slowly faded into the background as the guide and his top disciples became the center of her world. She was told that family outside the path was weak, but family inside the path was strong. So she learned to let go of the idea of mother and father and replaced it with the collective, the chosen family. Despite the constant control, there were small cracks in the order. Late at night, when the lights were low and children slept, Amara would sit by a dusty window and listen to the distant hum of something beyond the desert. She did not know what it was, but she knew it meant life existed beyond the fences. Sometimes she dreamed of walking beyond them and finding the source of the hum. Sometimes she dreamed of wind that smelled of ocean and streets full of colors and people who did not speak in hushed, fearful tones. But dreams in the path were dangerous. Dreams were considered distractions from the sacred mission, and distractions were punished. Punishment came in many forms. There were lectures that lasted hours. There were days without food. There were isolation rooms where disciples sat in silence until their thoughts aligned again. Amara feared those rooms. She feared hunger, and she feared disappointing the guide most of all. So she buried her dreams deep where no one could see them, not even herself. Everything changed when a new family arrived at the commune. They came from the outside world, and they had things Amara had only heard whispers about. A girl her age named Elise carried a small canvas bag when she arrived, and in that bag was something forbidden. Amara discovered it by accident when she was asked to collect laundry. The bag fell open on the floor, and a small paperback book slid out, its pages worn, its cover creased. Before she could stop herself, Amara picked it up. The title meant nothing to her, but the name below it was familiar, because it was the name of a person the guide had once called a traitor. Amara stared at the book with wide eyes, heart pounding because possession of outside material was a heavy offense. She shoved the book back into the bag and closed it, but the image of it burned in her mind. She wondered why Elise had kept it and what secrets it might hold. That night, as she tried to sleep, she kept remembering the name on the cover and the way Elise had clutched the bag like it contained her soul. Amara did not know it yet, but that moment was the first small fracture in the wall the path had built around her. In the days that followed, Amara could not stop thinking about the worn paperback hidden in Elise's bag. She moved through chores and lessons with a tension inside her chest, like a string pulled too tight. She knew the rules of the path of light better than she knew her own reflection, which she had not seen since childhood because mirrors were forbidden. Rules said no outside materials, no private possessions, no stories except those given by the guide. Rules said curiosity was distraction, and distraction was sin. Yet curiosity sparked inside her despite her fear. Elise was different from the other girls. She asked quiet questions during study, like why certain teachings were true, or why the outside world had to be so wicked if it held families and schools and ordinary people. The teachers always deflected with the same answers. The outside world was poison, the guide was salvation, questions were a disease that needed to be purified. Amara watched Elise during work duty with the younger children. Elise moved with a gentle confidence like someone who knew sunlight outside the commune walls. She told the children stories while they stacked bricks and carried water. The stories had no magic or rebellion, so the adults allowed them, but they still felt forbidden to Amara because they contained laughter. Amara had forgotten that laughter could exist without consequence. One evening, Elise found Amara sweeping the courtyard and asked softly if she wanted help. Amara nodded because refusal would seem rude and rudeness was also punished. They worked in silence for a while until Elise spoke again. "Do you ever think about outside?" Amara's heart slammed against her ribs. She shook her head quickly, but Elise continued anyway. "I think about it all the time. I miss the sky and cities. I miss music that does not sound like chanting. I miss choosing things." Amara did not know how to respond, because those words were like sparks near dry grass, dangerous, too bright, too alive. She whispered that choice was a distraction, and choice belonged to the guide. Elise looked at her with sadness, as if hearing the words of a prisoner. Then she said, "Maybe one day you will choose something for yourself. Just one thing, even something small." That night, Amara could not sleep. The dormitory was quiet except for the soft breathing of the other girls. She stared at the ceiling, feeling like her mind was being scraped open. What would it mean to choose something for herself? What would she even choose? She did not know. She had never considered the idea before. The following week was inspection week, which meant the inner disciples searched every bed, every bag, every pocket for forbidden items. Amara knew that if they found Elise's book, the punishment would be severe: isolation, humiliation, possibly worse. Amara watched Elise as the inspections began. Elise tried to appear calm, but her hands trembled when the disciples reached her cot. They found nothing. After they left, Elise released a shaky breath. Amara stared in confusion until Elise whispered that she hid the book beneath a loose stone behind the laundry shed. Amara did not respond, but the information settled inside her like a secret seed waiting for rain. 2 days later, Amara was sent to the laundry shed alone to wash sheets from the infirmary. The shed sat near the outer fence, and its stone floor was uneven from years of sand shifting beneath it. Heat pressed down from the tin roof, and dust coated the wooden tables. As she scrubbed the sheets, she glanced at the stones near the back wall. Her pulse quickened. She should not look. She should not care. She should finish her work and leave before anyone noticed her hesitation. But something moved her feet. She knelt on the hot floor and pressed her fingers against the stones until one shifted. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth, was the hidden book. Her breath stalled as she lifted it. The cover was torn, the pages stained. It looked old and fragile, like it had survived firestorms in hands that tried to destroy it. The title read, "The Way Out." The name beneath was Mara Lynn, a woman the guide had called a traitor during sermons. He said she had abandoned the path and fallen into corruption. But what if that was not the truth? Amara opened the first page. There were no pictures, only paragraphs of words curled together like vines. She read slowly, skipping words she did not understand. The author wrote about growing up in a commune far from cities and how she had been told the outside world was evil. She wrote about rules and punishment and fear that lived in her bones. She wrote about doubt. That word struck Amara like lightning. Doubt was the most forbidden emotion of all because doubt weakened obedience. The guide said doubt was the voice of darkness trying to pull disciples away from the sacred path. But here, in her hands, was a woman who had doubted and survived. A noise outside startled Amara, and she quickly wrapped the book and returned the stone to its place. Her heart raced, her hands shook. For the rest of the day, she felt as if the ground beneath her feet had changed shape slightly. She felt taller somehow, wider inside, not in a proud way, but in a way that made space for something new. Over the next weeks, Amara found excuses to visit the shed. Sometimes she would read a page before shoving the book back, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes a single sentence, but each time she left with her mind echoing. The book spoke of something called identity. It said identity was something you built from choices you made, from things you loved and hated, from memories and dreams. Amara realized that she had no identity. She had roles, she had rules, she had fear, but she did not know if she preferred sunrise or sunset because the commune taught that both belonged to the guide and not to them. One evening, after study, Elise approached Amara and asked if she had been to the shed. Amara froze. Her voice failed. Elise whispered, "You can read it. I trust you. I just wanted someone else to know that we are not crazy for wanting more." That night, Amara lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts whirled like sand in a storm. She felt fear, but beneath the fear, she felt something unfamiliar. A small spark of agency, a tiny beginning. She did not know that the spark would grow. She did not know that it would lead her beyond the walls she once believed were sacred. All she knew was that the world suddenly felt bigger than the path of light, and she was no longer sure what to believe. The spark inside Amara did not fade after that night. Instead, it grew silently, like a seed hidden beneath dry soil, waiting for rain. Days passed in a strange blur of chores, prayer, and study, yet everything felt different, because now Amara knew that someone else had questioned the path of light and survived long enough to write about it. The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. She found herself wondering who Mara Lynn had been before she escaped and what she had become after she left the commune described in her book. Amara wondered if Mara Lynn ever felt the same hollow emptiness that Amara felt when she tried to imagine her own identity. Identity. That word repeated inside her like a whispered prayer. During work duty, she watched the other disciples move in perfect lines, heads down, voices muted. They were uniform, like bricks in a wall. No one stood out. No one chose anything. Their hair was the same, their clothing was the same, their expressions were blank, as though emotion was a luxury they could not afford. Amara saw herself among them and felt a painful tightness in her chest because she realized she was just as faceless as the others. At mealtime, she sat across from Elise, who ate quietly with her eyes lowered, the way girls were trained to do. But when their eyes met for a fraction of a second, there was something alive in Elise, something that refused to be smothered. When their shift ended, Elise walked beside her and whispered, "Do you like reading?" Amara almost said no, because admitting yes felt dangerous, but the truth slipped out in a faint whisper. "I think so." Elise smiled with her eyes, because smiling with lips was considered vanity. Later that evening, Amara was ordered to help in the herb garden behind the dormitory. The garden was small and dry, with neat rows of plants used for medicine and cooking. As she pulled weeds, her mind replayed sentences from Mara Lynn's book, sentences about fear and the moment Mara had realized her fear was not loyalty, but captivity. Amara wondered if her own fear was the same. The guide delivered a sermon that night in the main hall. His voice echoed through the wooden beams as he spoke of purity, of surrender, and of the sacred mission that would one day change the world. He said the outside world was full of liars who worshipped pride and material things, and that only the path could guide souls into the light. The disciples bowed their heads and repeated the responses in unison. Amara spoke the words too, but her voice felt hollow, like she was echoing something that no longer lived inside her. When the sermon ended, the guide called for testimonies. One by one, disciples stepped forward to confess doubts or struggles. Confession was supposed to cleanse them. Punishment was supposed to purify them. Amara watched with tight fists as a young boy admitted that he missed his grandmother from the outside world. The hall grew silent. The guide smiled with false warmth and told the boy that love for outsiders was a sickness that could be cured with obedience. 2 disciples escorted the boy away for correction. Amara knew he would spend days in isolation and return thinner, quieter, and less alive. Her stomach twisted. That night, Elise found Amara by the water barrels behind the hall. She whispered, "I want to show you something." Amara hesitated but followed. They moved quietly to a small storage shed near the outer fence. Elise slipped inside and lit a small battery lantern she had hidden under a crate. It was the first artificial light Amara had ever seen that did not belong to the commune. The lantern cast a soft glow over their faces, and Amara felt like she had stepped into another world. Elise crouched and pulled a folded piece of paper from her boot. She handed it to Amara with trembling hands. Amara unfolded it carefully. It was a printed page torn from a magazine. It showed a picture of a girl riding a bicycle along a paved street lined with trees. The girl wore bright yellow clothing and smiled freely as if no one was watching. Amara stared at the picture, breathless. She had never seen clothing like that. She had never seen a bicycle. She had never seen a street that was not dirt. She whispered, "Is this real?" Elise nodded. "My cousin gave me that before we came here. She said the world is big and we deserve to see it." Amara traced the outline of the girl in the picture. The girl looked alive in a way no one inside the path ever looked. The picture made something ache deep inside her, a longing so strong it frightened her. She folded the paper and returned it to Elise with shaking hands. Elise whispered, "There is more out there than this, and we do not have to stay forever." Amara felt fear clamp around her throat. Leaving the path was unthinkable. The guide said outsiders would hunt escapees and that God's wrath would crush anyone who abandoned their sacred mission. But Mara Lynn's book contradicted that, and now this picture contradicted that too. Pieces of truth were gathering around Amara like shards of glass, sharp, dangerous, impossible to ignore. When Amara returned to the dormitory, she lay awake listening to the soft breathing of the other girls. She imagined riding a bicycle through a street lined with trees. She imagined choosing her own clothing. She imagined laughing without fear. She imagined having a name that belonged only to her and not to the path. For the first time, she wondered what her life would look like if she was allowed to exist beyond obedience. The days that followed felt heavier than any Amara had known, because knowledge once planted refuses to die, even when the soil is hostile and the sky offers no rain. She moved like a shadow through prayer, through chores, through lectures, yet inside her mind there was movement, like wings beating against a cage. Every time she bent to gather water, she remembered the girl on the bicycle. Every time she walked past the laundry shed, she thought of Mara Lynn and her forbidden pages. Every time Elise looked at her, Amara felt seen in a way both terrifying and holy. The commune prepared for the annual day of purification, a ritual that demanded fasting, silence, and total obedience. The guide said the ritual cleansed the spirit and strengthened loyalty to the sacred mission. Children practiced chants in the courtyard, servants scrubbed floors until their hands bled. Disciples rehearsed their testimonies. Amara hated the testimonies most of all because they required disciples to accuse themselves of sins they did not feel and surrender pieces of their minds until nothing remained but hollow shapes that fit the guide's mold. During preparations, Amara overheard two inner disciples whispering about Elise. One said she asked too many questions. The other said her spirit was restless, which was the polite word for dangerous. Amara felt ice inside her blood because she knew what happened to restless spirits. They disappeared for weeks and returned with blank eyes and slower voices, or they never returned at all. That evening, Elise sat beside Amara in the dormitory, sorting bundles of dried herbs for the infirmary. The supervisor watched them from across the room, so they did not speak. Instead, they passed tiny messages with their eyes. Amara saw fear flickering in Elise, but also resolve. She wanted to reach out to her, wanted to whisper a warning, but the supervisor rose and announced, "Lights out," so the moment passed like a bird escaping into the night. When darkness settled, Amara lay awake, listening to the murmurs of sleeping girls. She thought of Marilyn's book and how Mara had written that the moment she first considered leaving was the moment she began to truly exist. Amara wondered if considering escape counted as betrayal or if it counted as awakening. She wondered if identity could form without freedom or if freedom had to come first. Her mind spun until exhaustion swallowed her. Morning brought Punishment Day, a weekly ritual where minor disobediences were corrected publicly to deter greater deviance. The courtyard filled with disciples arranged by age and role. The sun burned overhead, the air tasted of dust and tension. 3 names were called, including Elise. Amara felt her heart collapse inward. Elise stepped forward slowly, eyes lowered, hands still. The guide asked her to confess her sin. Elise whispered that she had spoken too freely. The guide nodded as if this confirmed everything, and ordered her to isolation so that her spirit could be purified. The crowd remained silent because silence was required. Elise was escorted away. Amara stared at the ground, fighting the unbearable urge to scream. After Punishment Day, Amara was sent to work in the kitchens, preparing grains for the evening meal. The room smelled of boiled wheat and herbs. Steam coated the windows and made the walls drip with moisture. 2 older women monitored the work, chatting about supplies and rationing. Amara moved robotically, stirring pots and kneading dough. Her mind was louder than the noise of metal spoons scraping bowls. She remembered the isolation rooms, dark, windowless cells beneath the West Building, cold floors, no bedding, no voices except the ones inside your head. Some disciples emerged devastated. Some emerged obedient. Some did not emerge at all. Amara imagined Elise in that pit, and something inside her snapped like a brittle twig. Fear once shaped her world, but now it began to shape her resistance. Later that night, Amara slipped out of the dormitory during the brief window between inspections. She pressed herself against the shadows of the outer buildings, moving silently toward the laundry shed. The desert wind howled low and mournful, kicking up dust that clung to her skin. She pried up the loose stone and retrieved the book. Her fingers shook as she lit a stolen match from the kitchen and shielded it from the wind. In the flickering glow, she read about Mara Lynn's escape. Mara wrote of crawling through a drainage tunnel beneath the outer fence of her commune, of running until her lungs burned and collapsing near a roadside station, of being found by a stranger who called for help. Amara had never heard of strangers offering help. The guide taught that strangers were predators. But Mara wrote that the kindness of the stranger was the beginning of her healing. Amara pressed the book to her chest as the match died, and darkness returned. She placed the book back because she knew she could not risk being found with it. Then she returned to the dormitory, praying silently that Elise would survive isolation long enough to see the world beyond the fence. 3 days passed before Elise returned. When she entered the dining hall, her shoulders were slumped and her steps unsteady. Her eyes looked dull, but not empty. Amara recognized a fire still alive beneath the dust of punishment. When they sat for evening study, Elise slipped a tiny scrap of cloth into Amara's hand. Later, in the dormitory, Amara unrolled it and found 3 words written with charcoal. "We leave soon." The words crushed her breath and ignited it at the same time. Leave meant escape. Escape meant death if they were caught. Escape meant life if they were not. The idea terrified her. The idea thrilled her. She could not sleep that night or the next. Her mind was a battlefield where fear and desire clashed without mercy. She thought of her parents, who accepted the path as truth. Would they understand? Would they grieve? Would they follow? She did not know, but she did know that if she stayed, she would lose the spark inside her and become another ghost in service of the guide. On the 4th night, the scrap of cloth was replaced at her bedside with another message: "Tunnel behind the shed after purification." She read the words again and again until they etched themselves into her mind. There was no going back now. She had tasted possibility, and it was more intoxicating than fear. The day of purification arrived beneath a sky the color of pale ash, and Amara felt as if the sun itself had been muted by the weight of ritual. Disciples dressed in coarse white garments filed into the main courtyard in silent rows, heads bowed, hands clasped behind their backs. The guide stood on a raised platform with his silver hair tied at the base of his neck and his robes billowing like smoke in the wind. He lifted his hands, and the procession began. First, there was chanting, low and rhythmic, the sound vibrating through the dry air like the hum of distant machines Amara had never seen. Then there was kneeling and the taste of dust filling their mouths as they pressed their foreheads to the ground. Then came the fast, where they swallowed nothing but air and swallowed their hunger with it. Amara felt lightheaded as the hours passed, hunger clawing at her stomach, thirst scraping her throat. But she also felt a sharpness in her awareness, as if every sound, every breath, every footstep burned itself into her memory. She saw the younger children sway with exhaustion. She saw mothers hold their infants close to shield them from the sun. She saw inner disciples walk through the rows, searching for signs of weakness to punish later. But most of all, she saw the fence in the distance, glinting beneath the sun, and she imagined the world beyond it. When darkness finally settled and the ritual ended, the disciples were released to their quarters to rest. No one spoke because the fast continued until morning, and speech was forbidden until the guide released them from silence. Amara walked beside the other girls, her legs trembling from hunger, her vision swimming. When she lay down on her thin cot, she did not sleep. She waited. The air was heavy with exhaustion and devotion, but beneath it, her heart pounded with terrible certainty. Hours passed. Footsteps echoed in the halls as patrols completed their rounds. The guards believed purification made disciples too weak to rebel. They did not know that hunger sharpened Amara's desperation into a blade. When the final patrol passed and the dormitory fell still, Amara rose from her cot, moving soundlessly across the floor. 2 other girls stirred but did not wake. She slipped through the door into the night. The desert wind whipped against her face, bringing the smell of sand and sage. Her body ached, but her mind was a storm. She moved along the outer wall of the dormitory, keeping to the shadows until she reached the laundry shed. The sky was moonless, and the darkness was almost merciful. Behind the shed, the ground sloped downward where old unused storage crates were stacked and half buried in sand. Elise knelt beside them, eyes narrowed, scanning the courtyard for movement. When she saw Amara, she exhaled with relief. "You came," she whispered, so softly it barely made a sound. Amara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Elise pulled away 2 crates, revealing a rusted metal grate set into the ground. The grate covered the mouth of an old drainage tunnel that once directed storm water away from the commune, but had been sealed off years ago. Elise had discovered that the bars were weakened with rust and sand. Together, they pried the grate upward, straining with trembling arms until it shifted free with a soft metallic groan. Cold air wafted from the dark tunnel, smelling of wet earth and decay. Elise lowered herself in first, landing on her hands and knees in the dirt. Amara followed, her heart beating so violently she feared it would echo through the night. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to crawl. The ground was slick with moisture and rough stones cut into their palms and knees. The ceiling was low, scraping against their backs as they moved forward. Darkness swallowed them completely, and Amara could not see Elise's silhouette anymore. She could only hear her breathing. Every inch forward felt like crossing a lifetime. The air grew colder, and the tunnel sloped downward, deeper into the unknown. After what felt like hours, they reached a fork where the tunnel split in two directions. Elise whispered that Mara Lynn's book described a tunnel beneath her commune that led toward the outer fence. She believed this must be similar. Amara felt terror claw at her, but she nodded and followed the left passage. The air grew damper, the stones slicker. At times, the ceiling dipped so low they had to press their faces into mud to squeeze beneath it. Amara felt her breath shorten as the weight of earth pressed around her. She was no longer crawling through tunnels, she was crawling through her own fear. Finally, the tunnel began to ascend. Elise paused, feeling along the ceiling until her hands brushed against metal. A second grate. They pushed upward, but it did not move. They tried again, but the rust held firm. Amara's strength was nearly gone from fasting, but a surge of desperation shot through her. She pressed her palms against the grate and pushed with everything left in her body. Something snapped with a soft, wet sound, and the grate lifted slightly. Elise wedged her fingers beneath it, and together they forced it open enough to squeeze through. They emerged behind a row of old water tanks outside the west perimeter of the commune. Amara stared at the night sky from a place she had never been allowed to stand. The fence loomed ahead, tall and silver, razor wire catching what little starlight existed. Their tunnel spat them out on the wrong side of the inner grounds, but they were closer to freedom than ever before. They crawled along the sand, keeping low as they approached the fence. Elise pulled a small wire cutter from her boot. Where she got it, Amara did not know. She watched as Elise worked the cutter around the mesh, creating a small opening, inch by inch. The sound of metal snapping felt loud enough to wake the desert itself. Amara kept watch, eyes darting across the shadows, expecting a shout or a rifle, or the roaring voice of the guide. But no one came. When the final patrol passed and the opening was large enough, Elise slipped through first, tearing her garment on the metal. Amara followed, her heart pounding so fast she felt faint. Both girls dropped into the sand on the other side, breathless and shaking. For the first time in their lives, there was no fence between them and the world. But escape did not end there. They were miles from any town, and the desert night was bitter and endless. Their garments were thin, and the ground cold beneath their bare feet. Elise pointed toward the faint glow on the horizon. "Lights," she whispered. "That way." They walked, their bodies weak from fasting and crawling and fear. Sandstorms of thought battered their minds as they moved through the darkness. Amara imagined the commune discovering their absence when morning came. She imagined the punishments that would follow, the search parties, the sermons of betrayal, the lies told about them. But she also imagined things she had never allowed herself to imagine. Trees lining streets, music drifting from open windows, names chosen instead of assigned, food chosen instead of rationed, lives owned instead of borrowed. Hours passed, and the horizon brightened, not from dawn, but from artificial light. A gas station sat alone on the desert road, glowing like a beacon. Elise stumbled toward it, and Amara followed, half-conscious. She did not know what awaited them, only that it was not the path of light, and that was enough.
The gas station sat like a tiny island of light in the endless desert night, and Amara wondered if this was how the world looked outside the path, a strange mix of harshness and wonder, with neon signs buzzing over dusty pavement and metal machines glinting under street lamps. She followed Elise across the gravel, though her legs were shaking and her hunger felt like claws inside her belly. Both girls reached the edge of the lot and paused because they had never seen machines up close before, only heard warnings about them during sermons. Strange shapes rested near the pumps, some tall with glass fronts, some low with thick wheels and metal skin. Amara realized these must be cars and trucks, the same vehicles Mara Lynn described in her book, machines that people use to travel across the world instead of walking in lines like disciples. The glass door of the shop slid open with a hiss, and cold air rushed out, carrying scents Amara could not name. Something sweet, something salty, something chemical, something clean. They froze in shock as a man stepped out holding a sack of trash. He wore denim and a shirt with bright colors printed across the front, and he did not seem afraid of anything as he walked to the dumpsters and tossed the sack in with a casual motion. When he turned back toward the door, his eyes landed on the two girls. He frowned slightly, then looked again as if unsure of what he was seeing. "Hey, you two okay?" His voice was calm, but Amara and Elise had never heard a stranger speak directly to them before. Inside the path, no outsider voices existed. They stared at him, unable to answer because they did not know what words to use or what rules applied here in this world without fences. The man stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. "I work here," he said. "You look lost." Elise swayed on her feet, then collapsed to her knees from exhaustion. The man dropped to her side. "Are you hurt?" Amara felt panic surge through her. Touch was controlled in the path, but here a stranger touched Elise freely and no punishment followed. Instead, only concern. Amara knelt beside Elise and whispered, though her throat burned from thirst, "We need water." The man nodded and helped them inside the shop. The door slid open again, blasting them with cold air and bright light that hurt their eyes. Shelves filled the room with rows and rows of colorful objects, bags with pictures of food, plastic bottles with liquid, boxes of sweets, metal cans with bright logos. They had never seen so many choices at once, and the sight overwhelmed them. The man opened a bottle of water and handed it to Elise, who drank greedily. He opened another and gave it to Amara, who clutched it with trembling hands. She drank, and the cold water seemed to bring her back into her body. Her mind spun with fear and relief, because this world was real. It was not poison like the guide claimed. Another worker appeared from behind the counter, a woman with curly hair pulled into a messy bun. She spoke with concern. "There are kids out here looking half-starved." The man nodded and said, "We need to call someone." The woman asked, "Who?" "The police?" The man shook his head gently. "No, let us hear what they need first." Then he crouched down to their level and said softly, "Can you tell us where you came from?" Amara opened her mouth, then closed it again because she did not know the name of the outside world, only the name of her prison. Elise whispered, "Path of Light." The workers exchanged glances. The woman said quietly, "I have heard that name before." The man asked, "Did you run away?" Elise nodded slowly. The woman let out a breath as if a puzzle piece had snapped into place. She turned to the man and said, "We need to call a crisis line. This is one of those cult kids situations." The word cult was new to Amara, but Elise flinched as if she understood its weight. Amara asked in a weak voice, "Are they going to send us back?" The man looked horrified. "No, nobody is sending you back, I promise." His voice carried certainty, like a hand held out in the dark.
The woman made a call, speaking quickly about miners, escape, hydration, starvation, danger, and welfare. Amara could not understand most of the vocabulary, but she recognized concern and urgency. When the woman hung up, she returned with bags of food, opening them so the girls would not have to ask. Elise ate slowly, as if tasting food for the first time in years. Amara tasted chips and bread and fruit, and every flavor hit her with shock, because food in the path was bland and rationed, while this food exploded with taste and color. Soon, headlights swept across the lot and a white vehicle pulled in. Two women stepped out wearing jackets with symbols on them. One had short hair and warm eyes, and the other carried a backpack filled with supplies. They approached slowly as the man explained what he had found. The woman with warm eyes crouched down and asked, "May I speak with you?" Her voice was gentle, like a teacher, not like the harsh voices of inner disciples. Amara nodded. The woman asked simple questions. Are you safe? Do you feel hurt anywhere? How old are you? Are you siblings? Where did you come from? Elise did most of the talking because Amara was overwhelmed by newness. She explained that they escaped a place with strict rules where questions were punished and speaking to outsiders forbidden. She explained that they crawled through a tunnel and traveled through the desert. The women listened without interrupting, without disbelief, without disbelief. Amara kept waiting for punishment, but it never came. When Elise finished, the woman with warm eyes said, "You are very brave for surviving, and you are not in trouble. We are here to help you." Then she asked if they had family outside the commune. Elise shook her head. Amara whispered, "I do not know." The women exchanged a sad glance. They led the girls into the white vehicle and wrapped blankets around their shoulders. Amara pressed her forehead to the window as they drove. She saw streetlights, buildings, signs, and more cars. The world outside was enormous and alive and terrifying. Eventually, they arrived at a small building with painted walls and a sign that read Youth Resource Center. Inside, there were couches and posters with bright pictures and soft lighting that reminded Amara of sunrise. They were given warm showers, clean clothing, and a quiet room with 2 beds. A nurse examined them and said they were dehydrated but stable and that they needed rest. No one shouted, no one forced them to pray, no one took their voices. For the first time in their lives, they were allowed to exist without obedience. Elise fell asleep almost instantly from exhaustion, but Amara could not. She sat on the bed, touching the soft blanket, tracing the stitching with her fingers. She looked at the ceiling and whispered to herself, "This is real. I am out." But the sentence that terrified her most was the one she could barely say out loud. Who am I now? Her identity had been shaped only by the guide and the path. Without them, she felt like a blank page waiting to be written. She did not know if she liked the food she ate, the clothing she wore, the sound of music that drifted from the hallway. She did not know what she believed or who she wanted to become. Hours later, the woman with the warm eyes returned and sat beside her. She said quietly, "I know you are scared, but you are not alone. Many have run from places like the one you escaped, and they've found new names, new lives, new selves. It is not easy, but it is possible." Amara asked, "How do I know who I am?" The woman smiled gently. "You begin by choosing. Little things first. You choose your favorite food, your favorite color, your favorite music. You choose what makes you feel safe. And one day, you will choose your future." Amara thought of the book hidden in the laundry shed, and of the bicycle girl, and of Elise crawling beside her through the tunnel. She realized that identity might not be something given by a leader, but something discovered by living. She finally closed her eyes and slept, knowing that morning would bring questions and fear and change, but also something she had never had before: possibility. Amara awoke to sunlight spilling through the window and warm air that smelled nothing like the desert dust of the path of light. Her body ached, but in a way that felt alive instead of punished. She sat up on the bed beside Elise, who was still sleeping soundly, her face relaxed for the first time in years. Amara touched the blanket and felt the softness beneath her fingers and realized that comfort could exist without guilt. The room was quiet, except for distant voices and the hum of the building, and for the first time she felt that silence was not oppression. The woman with warm eyes returned, carrying breakfast, and placed the tray gently on the table. She said softly, "Good morning, I brought you something to eat." Amara stared at the food in wonder. Eggs, bread, fruit juice. She had tasted bread and fruit before at the gas station, but nothing like this. Nothing served with care instead of necessity. She reached for the food and for the first time chose what she wanted. She poured juice into a cup, she chose the bread with seeds on top, and the eggs cooked in a way she liked. As she ate, she felt a small thrill. Choice was dangerous in the path. Choice was heresy. But here, choice was safe. Choice was freedom. Over the next days, the staff at the Youth Resource Center introduced the girls to counseling and support groups. They met other youths who had escaped strict communes or abusive households, and each story mirrored pieces of their own lives. Some were joyful because they had discovered their freedom. Some were tearful because they remembered all they had lost. Amara listened quietly at first, but slowly began to speak. She shared what it had been like to live under constant control, to have identity erased, to feel fear as a permanent companion. When she spoke, it was not in a trembling voice, but steady and measured. The words felt heavy, but necessary. Each word reclaimed a piece of her soul. She learned to sleep without fear. She learned to eat without guilt. She learned that laughter could be unpunished. Every small choice became an act of reclamation. She chose her clothing, her food, her bed. She chose music to listen to, colors to decorate her space, even the direction she wanted to face in the morning. It felt strange at first, but with each decision, she felt stronger. Her body remembered freedom in muscles that had once moved only in prescribed ways. Amara began to write. She wrote in a notebook given to her by the staff. She wrote Mara Lynn's story alongside her own, weaving memories of the path with the promise of the outside. She wrote about crawling through the drainage tunnel, about nights spent in hunger, about the fear that had once shaped her entire existence. She wrote about Elise, who had been her courage and her companion, and who now laughed freely at jokes she had never understood before. The act of writing became a ritual, a bridge between the girl the path tried to erase and the woman she was becoming. Months passed, and Amara and Elise enrolled in classes where they learned the basics of the world beyond the commune: math, reading, computers. They met teachers who encouraged questions, who listened, and who celebrated mistakes. Amara found that she loved history because it told stories of people who resisted control and fought for themselves. She discovered music she loved, jazz and classical, that made her chest swell and her eyes water. She learned that she liked the smell of rain and the taste of strawberries. Small things that seemed meaningless to the path were revelations in this world. The day finally came when they were allowed to make a phone call. Amara hesitated as she held the receiver. Her parents' names burned on her lips. She did not know if they had survived, if they were searching, if they would understand. When she finally dialed the number, no one answered, but the act of reaching out was enough. She hung up and felt something shift inside her. She was no longer waiting for validation from the path. She was making her own connections in her own time. Amara began to speak publicly about her experience. She worked with the center to raise awareness about high-control groups and communes. She shared her story, carefully avoiding names to protect herself and others. People listened. They asked questions. They offered support. Her voice became a tool of empowerment instead of fear. The more she spoke, the more her identity solidified. She was not only Amara, the escapee. She was Amara, the advocate, the survivor, the writer, the chooser of her own life.
Elise thrived alongside her. They lived in small, shared apartments where they could decorate as they pleased. They cooked meals together, they laughed loudly, they made music and listened to music. They walked freely down city streets, holding hands and pointing at things that amazed them, because for the first time, amazement was theirs to feel. No guide, no rules, no fences dictated how they could exist. Years later, Amara looked at herself in a mirror she had chosen to hang in her apartment. She traced her face with her fingers and smiled. She was unrecognizable to the child who had crawled through the drainage tunnel and terrified of the dark. Yet the memory of that child lived inside her in a quiet corner. It reminded her of resilience, courage, determination, and the power of a spark to ignite change. Amara knew she would never forget the path of light or the fear that had once shaped her existence, but she also knew that it no longer defined her. Her identity was hers to shape, hers to choose, hers to live. She had reclaimed herself, and in reclaiming herself, she had reclaimed life. She turned to Elise, who was humming softly while arranging flowers on the table. They exchanged a look, full of understanding, full of joy, full of the wordless recognition of survival. Amara whispered into the bright afternoon, "I am free." Elise smiled and replied, "So am I." The sun fell across the city skyline, and Amara felt it on her face and in her heart. She had survived the darkness, and now she belonged to herself.